Then you can look up and see, yeah. There are a couple of those.
All right, good afternoon. It's 1:30, December 7th. This is a special meeting of the Administration Committee. I'd like to call the meeting to order, acknowledge that the press and the public have been duly notified of the meeting in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. There's one agenda item, and that's discussion, consideration of wage and compensation, compensation study results and recommendations. So we've gotten some new information and new data and had some time to kind of go over it, but I would just open up at this point after we get the information. I have some comments and ways to kind of maybe navigate through this, but I'd open it up to committee for any of their comments or thoughts after looking at the data.
Yeah, just one thing to add, and I think is kind of supporting what you're saying, John. I think the additional information we got from the consultants was very helpful. I think being able to kind of see how some of the conclusions were arrived at and the sources of which towns or cities contributed and which way they contributed was very helpful. So maybe, after Rusty speaks, maybe the best thing to do would just be see what you have for your comments and kind of walk through a framework.
Any comments, Russ?
Well, I don't have anything to add with the new data that we got. I quite honestly, I looked at it, but it doesn't change my mindset as to what the initial compensation study directed us towards, and that was a survey done by a lot of employees that clearly points out that we need to make some adjustments, and I don't know what that adjustment's gonna be, but it's for full council to really dig into that, I guess, on the 18th, but this latest information was helpful, but it just didn't, for me, it didn't make any difference from what my thoughts and opinions have been in the past.
All right, so I'm just going to repeat what I think the goals again of the committee of what we're trying to do, and it's just a rehash, I think what I laid out last time, but that's kind of the way I've marched through this. I spent a lot of hours going through this information and data, requesting some more. Desiree and I have spent some time, and I think we can kind of march through a plan to get us closer to a recommendation to council. But the goal was to develop a compensation proposal for all city employees as a recommendation to city council that accomplishes the following. One, creates a sustainable philosophy and structure to go forward with. Two, achieves compensation for city employees that is competitive with surrounding communities for equivalent responsibilities. Three, stays within the city's current budget constraints or identifies funding sources. And the fourth thing we wanted to hit, that I don't know if we'll have time before the council meeting, but there's probably a few things we can touch on today, is hiring and retention practices. So that's kind of the mindset that I've spent a lot of time, again, going through this information with. If we stick with the first one, it's a philosophy and the structure. I think where I am with it, and again, Desiree and I spent a little bit of time today talking about it, but I think what I would like to, and what I'd like to do is to go through these things, have discussions around, but then have Evergreen do a final model of what we kind of talk about here. And as well have you or Deborah go through and develop a financial model, how that impacts two things. One, on a full year basis, and second, how we impact the rest of FY24 budget and kind of where that funding is going to come from, recommendations. So those are things. But getting back to philosophy and structure, I think what I would like to see is that we maintain what the city and the last study did, and that's for public safety, that we set the targets above what the area medians are. So that's why I'm suggesting, and what we have in here is a 60% of the market studies as the targets. That's one thing I'd like to see us do, and I think that's what the models currently reflect.
That's correct. The starting salary and the range classification and the ranges for each classification are based off of the 60th percentile for police and fire in the step plan, and then general pay plan is at the 50th
Yeah,
percentile.
and that's what I'd like to see it remain at. I think that's it kind of, again, meets those objectives. And then we talk about the ranges, so, the percent that the range, goes for each of the areas. I think for public safety, what I would like to see the ranges go at 40%. That looks like, when I look at the market results and adjust, it looks like, police were, lower. Fire was a little higher, and if you average it out, I think it's right at 40%. So I'd like to see us set the targets at 40%.
And that would be a difference from
For
our,
public safety.
correct, our current
Is at
range
35.
spread for police and fire is 35%, so it would go up to 40%.
5%, yeah. So in the step, and again, I understand from Chief, maybe the fire has a different step than what we're doing. We have a 25-year step here, but the steps would go from 1.25% up to 1.41%, I think. But that would be the increase in the steps.
So it broadens the range and it broadens the steps.
Yes. I would like, all the other ranges, I would like to see at 50%. All the general. And for the G101 to 108s, I would like to see what if you remember, and this is what I requested that we just received, but the market studies went out and asked communities for the data. And then it was adjusted, all the areas that we asked were in this area, though, in the surrounding metro Charleston area. But what we did is we adjusted it for COLA, cost of living adjustments. And I'd like to see just for the G101 and G108, and for those that don't know what that is, that's really the executive leadership team of the city. So it's Desiree and all the department heads. I'd like to see that on a non-COLA basis. So you take out those cost of living for those grades. And I think, as I look at that, I think that creates, again, a philosophy that we're above market. I think that's a philosophy that sets a structure of the ranges that is sustainable to go forward with. Not to saying that we don't have to do these on these market studies on some routine basis, but I think it sets up a structure that's different what we have today and more competitive with the area.
So these are the recommendations you want to have evergreen model for
Yeah.
us to look at?
Yep. And then that's just really the ranges, and then there's a discussion around the compensation. And of course, there's a whole variety of different options in there. But the ones that I talked to, and kind of with Desiree today, and where I've kind of got my head at least wrapped around, is that fire and police are placed on a step-to-step adjustment. So if we set the new ranges, wherever they are in their current step, we try to target into the new range, and with staff adjustments. So my recommendation would be that we give you a bucket of money for fire, give you a bucket of money for police, and Desiree and each of the chiefs sit down, and there could be some minor variations that you want to do from an equity standpoint, but you agree on those. But in general, it would be more of a step-to-step kind of philosophy.
And I think that stays consistent with what we talked about at the council meeting about providing you and your department heads some leeway and giving you the budget to work with. Yeah.
And then the same thing on the general employees, except we break them out into two different pieces. We got G1 to G10. Those are the new pay grades there. We're going from the old pay grades to these new pay grades. But the G1 to G10 would be the current range penetration again, because they're not on steps, they're on range penetration, but with a cap at 7.5% for G1 to G10, and for G101 to G108, again, same thing, but a cap at 5.5%. And so that's probably gonna be, upwards of a $800,000 fully loaded adjustment after we see the numbers. Well, that's why I want them to run them, but I imagine it's gonna be upwards of $800,000 impact. And so that's what I would like, though, for Deborah to run the models again to show what the FY '24 impact is on the rest of the year, and then what a full year impact would be, so we can have some idea of the funding and how this thing's going to be. Do we pull out of fund balances? Do we, have tax increases? All those discussions as well.
I think it's
Quick
going
question.
to be, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna ask a quick question. So, and we're assuming the ranges that have been presented by the consultant at that 60th percentile. Is that correct? John, is that in your assumption?
I think he said that the 60th percentile for police
Those-
and
And those
fire.
ranges are, where those
Yeah,
ranges are
yeah.
recommended.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
The 50th percentile for the
So
general pay
the min,
plan.
the max, the min, midpoint, max are what's in the.
Yep.
Yeah, great. Okay.
Well, it'll change slightly. The last version we discussed at the last meeting had a range spread for police and fire of 43%. I think the request has been made to look at what
With the new range spreads.
40% and 50% for general. We had 55 and
But
43.
if the anchor's starting off the number that was up on the right, like a,
Yeah, the
The anchor
minimum.
will stay the same.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The minimum for the fire for FO1 would, a starting pay for a firefighter would start at 49,000
Yep.
and 54,500 for police.
Got it.
Correct.
And that's at the 60th percentile based on market.
All right, thank you.
And just I wanted to remind you all, the list we have from Evergreen, it takes it to the individual level of current staffing.
Yep.
As you all know, we have multiple vacancies, so that would have to be included in the final analysis. You're not seeing that in the numbers from the spreadsheet from Evergreen, because they're just including current personnel.
So that would, you would plug the vacancies, you'd plug that in at the proper level that we're.
Correct. We would plug them in
Yeah.
at probably maybe 10% over minimum, just for budgeting purposes
Yeah.
to give us some wiggle room, but we would use the new salaries in accordance with the proposed starting.
Yeah, that makes sense, to price it out as the positions are assumed to be filled. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, I guess I'd also like to, there was some discussion and there could have been some misunderstanding, but when, and I guess I'll open this to the chiefs in particular, but when you hire a new employee that has experience, how do you place them coming in? Do you give them, I think this gets to more even attracting and for that matter, retaining employees. I mean, if somebody has, for example, 15 years of experience as a policeman somewhere and they're coming in there, where do you place them in the step?
Chief, you can come here.
And the same, I don't know if it's consistent with the fire department or the police department or not, but if it's different, then let us know if you do something different.
Our practice recently, when we moved to the step plan, has been that we give them about half of the time they had. So if they're at 15, we typically try to take that down to like a 7, step 7. We do that because we've got some people that had prior experience that were here and didn't get credit for that prior experience. They were put on the step plan based on their years of service here.
Yeah.
So to keep it fair for them, we do about half
Okay.
of what they were doing.
Is that consistent with what you, and maybe I got confused at the last conversation, is that consistent with what you used to do at your prior departments? Or how did you do it at your prior position, like Mount Pleasant?
For my prior agency, we brought them in, we basically had a min and a mid, and we would try to put them somewhere in between that and compare their experience to what we currently had and where they were. I had a whole bunch of flexibility when it came to that. that side and just trying to recruit, because that was an 8-officer agency, so it was much harder to get that experience in the door.
And I think it depends, and I'll let the chief speak from his behalf, but it depends, right, on our budget constraints. If we are replacing a position and we're bringing in somebody with similar experience, we try to, we don't necessarily just hire people at the minimum. We bring in and we look at what our budgetary amount is for that department, and within that, we do give ourselves a little bit of flexibility, but that doesn't happen all the time. It really depends on the candidate. It depends on how, what we have in the budget, the person that left, and what we're available or able to do at that point.
So I'm familiar with the system, prior to here, where it was a city policy, or town policy to, when you hire, you have the ability to take that individual up to midpoint. You could not go beyond midpoint. So similar to what Chief Cornett had in his previous agency, you had a minimum, mid, and max. Now, with the exception, those are for staff level positions. Typically, for fire department positions, how that has gone for us, and Janice could correct me if I'm wrong, but the firefighters and firefighter medics that we have hired since I have been here, those have all been brought in at the minimum, regardless if they've had 10 years of experience, 15, or 1. And so having more flexibility in the future would be fantastic. That would be helpful. It would, for us, create some compression issues with our current employees who have, maybe they were hired at the minimum, but they had 10 or 15 years of experience. So that would have to be, Evergreen, I think, would have to help us out with that to make sure that those compression issues are avoided. I can tell you that where we have departed from that, we were able to recruit our fire marshal and our battalion chief of training, because those are staff positions, Monday through Friday. We did have flexibility there to where we could go between that minimum and midpoint range. Now, our battalion chief of training, he was a captain paramedic in Mount Pleasant, for example. And so that individual took a 20% pay cut to take this position here. So this position is an elevated position. Obviously, it's a battalion chief, so it's one level above. Staff position, you have a take-home vehicle, a lot more responsibility than a shift captain. The last 6 people that I've hired, either myself or other people in the department, have had prior relationships with those individuals. We have not hired anybody other than people that we have known over the last 16 months. So we currently have, 5 open positions right now. So we're definitely struggling. So
Can I ask
to your
two
point
follow-on
about that.
Yeah, can I ask 2 follow-on questions?
Yeah.
One, do you think you may have lost recruits because of the current structure that we have, or I don't want to say lack of flexibility, but because you're not able to do some of the things you were able to do at some of your with that flexibility?
Yes. So, and again, we'll never know, because they may never have applied, because they see what, the minimum is, and they know they're hired in as that minimum. And then they just never even applied because the range spread was too low. Or they might have looked at the minimum in the mid and said, oh, I know typically you can come in at the midpoint, and the midpoint's too far below. So they may have had those, done that research on their own and just never applied. But I do find that interesting that, the 6 people that we have applied, they have prior relationships with the people here. So we're doing some great things. We have a lot of great people. They want to work with a lot of great people here that we already have, and that's how we're attracting them. We're not attracting currently in the fire department due to our current wage structure that we have. It's because of relationships.
Is this something that, I don't know, maybe during the next calendar year or fiscal year, we could take a hard look at, you know, it sounds like we may not be making that adjustment to how you know, operate or other departments operate as far as flexibility bringing people in, because we might create equity issues within the current department. Maybe we take a look at what it would take to correct those equity issues to then give you the freedom to be able to do that, which might loosen up or give you more access to more people for hiring down the road. Is that something that you think would be worthwhile pursuing?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And to your point, you know, when we look at the step-to-step placement option that we are pursuing or hopefully implementing for police and fire, we're talking about substantial increases on average between 10 and 15% for our current personnel. So I think that'll help and provide a lot of space for us to, when we address the hiring practice and how much flexibility we have when bringing in people in, that the adjustments at that time won't need to be as dramatic as they would be if we just don't do
You
anything.
mean look at equity adjustment? It wouldn't be
Correct.
as, wouldn't be as dramatic, but, yeah.
And I would say.
I think we ought to take a look. Oh, sorry, go ahead,
I'm
Chief.
sorry, I just wanted to answer your
No.
question too from the police side. The step has been, we've recently started that process where we brought them in at half. In the past, we definitely lost people because we were starting them at the minimum.
Yeah.
And I will say recently, we've had.
Or they wouldn't apply.
Correct.
Yeah.
We've had 2 conditional offers that we've put out recently, and they were both declined. One was kind of monetary related, based on what our pay was going to be, but they were coming in with no experience. So that was just our minimum hiring. I will say when we have had conversations and I've put the step plan in front of them, most people really tend to like that because they're looking at it and they can plan for future. They know in 5 years, at a minimum, I'll be sitting at this point. And so most people have really actually liked that, and I make that part of their conditional offer. They get to see that step plan and look at it and take it with them. And so they enjoy that. But I think with what we've discussed here and increasing that minimum range would solve a lot of those issues that we've had so far.
Okay, thank you.
Have either of you, in your past life, so to speak, and Chief Cornett, I know you were in Springdale, which is basically a suburb of Columbia, Casey, and that area there, and Chief Oliverius in Mount Pleasant. So you're pulling from a much larger population demographic. I'm just making an assumption here. Was it less difficult for you to recruit in those larger areas than it has been out here on the Barrier Island, so to speak?
For us, it wasn't hard to recruit in Springdale because our pay was pretty good, but the problem was retention. Being a small area without all of the opportunities to do the fun things and the Hollywood things that people see. So we would typically get them and we would keep them for a short period of time and they would move on to a larger agency. That is a struggle that almost every small police department has to deal with. We have it here. We're trying to get creative on how we can bring that cool Hollywood stuff to them where they can experience it with other agencies but still remain part of our team. So we're trying to get creative with those steps, but it was actually harder to recruit because a lot of people just saw opportunities to start with us and use that as a platform to move on to a larger agency with more opportunities.
And my experience with, the size agency that I was familiar with, we struggled with retention, not so much recruitment. We had a very diverse recruitment base, but the retention piece and the wage and compensation study over there was done every 5 years. And so it was invariably, you're going to be behind with, a 5%, typical 5% increase with cost of living, merit every year. We were still behind, and people would try to hold out for that 5-year window, and it was the government, I guess just to say, revenue and expenditures and capital, all those things competing at the same time. And when you try to make that adjustment every 5 years, it was very difficult. And here, I think for us, with a 2-year window is phenomenal and fantastic, because what we have seen in the United States, this is a problem economically, and y'all are very well familiar with it, as we all are, just in our personal lives. But the inflationary pressure that we've seen, the adjustments in Social Security, they're unprecedented And our municipalities across this country have never had to deal with this, and councils like yourself have never had to deal with this challenge. So us being nimble and having that every 2 years, when I came here, this was when I asked that question and I got that answer, I was like, wow, that is so proactive and forward thinking. That is exactly what we will need, I will need in my tenure here to retain the best and then recruit the best. So I'm very encouraged by that, and this is fantastic. That is the way to go, because the market changes, and in fact, we're looking at numbers that are going to change. Like City of Charleston, they're on an annual budget. The numbers that we have right now, we compare with them. That's changing in January, here in next month. The other competition, they're on fiscal years. They'll change in July. So really, the numbers that we're looking at are more trailing and not forward-looking. Looking numbers, and I think taking that into consideration is important to consider as well.
And to follow up on your in reference to Springdale now, I still stay in touch with that chief quite frequently. They recently had to reduce their size of the department so that they could increase the starting pay, because they did start to struggle with recruiting, and it was all based on pay.
And that's one of the things that we're gonna, when we start planning our budget, new budget in early next year, we're gonna have to look at how we're keeping up pace with these adjustments. For the past several years, we moved from having a cost of living adjustment and a merit, and we went to a 100% full performance-based model of 2.5. And that I don't think that is enough to just keep up. So that is something that we're gonna very soon we'll have to face, so that we don't find ourselves every couple of years looking at these numbers and saying, oh my gosh, we're now again 8-10% behind everybody else, because we're not keeping up with that.
And in the meanwhile, you're losing people all the time.
Correct.
Also, so that's hidden cost in that as well.
Just to give folks an idea, I mean, we'll let Evergreen run the numbers, but on the fire side, I'm not gonna go through every single one, but just an entry-level firefighter, our current starting, our pay is 43, and the new proposal would take it, and the range is 43 to 58. From 43 to 58 is the current range. The new range would go from start at 49 and would go to 68. So, you're going up 6 on the low end, but over 10 on the high end. Police, kind of a similar thing on the current, it looks like the range is currently from 48 to 65 roughly. The new range would start at 54.5 and go to 76. So the ranges, really are expanded out. Not only are we raising the minimum quite a bit, but expanding out. So, I think, on the average, it looks like the average range on the fire and on the public safety side is, above 14%. So it's a fairly significant adjustment, and I think gets us at least into the goals that I stated in a competitive for the surrounding area. I would like to see, though, I think the plan should be for us to have one more meeting to finalize all this, and that we have an agreement that we can take to council on the 18th for the special meeting. So if we could get together next week one more time, after we, hopefully we can get this run pretty quickly, so it gives us some time to look at it. Maybe have a meeting on Tuesday afternoon late. Is that
Yeah,
sound
that
okay?
works.
That could work.
Let's see.
Next Tuesday at 3.
That's the 12th.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I could do it, it would have to be mid-afternoon. I've got something going on from like 11 a.m.
Yeah, I
to
can't do it
1.
in the morning, but.
3, does 3 work?
Talking
3's
cent?
fine with me.
Yeah, 3 o'clock on Tuesday, the 12th.
Yeah, that works for
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah.
Works.
Is there any other things we need to cover, or Desiree, do you think that will get us to where we need to get to if we get this?
So I'll just
through?
repeat what the changes that I'm
yeah.
gonna request for Evergreen, or for Evergreen to map out. We are in agreement that for police and fire step plan, we're looking at the 60th percentile
Yeah.
and 50th percentile for the general pay plan. You would like to see a 40% range spread for both police and fire's steps, and a 50% range spread for general pay plan. You would like to see the ranges for the grades G100 to G108 that is not adjusted by COLA.
Right,
And then you would like to see total fully loaded costs for step adjustments for police and fire
yep.
with some minor changes.
Yeah, I think what we'd like to do is just get the total amount, let's look at it, but not go individual by
Sure.
individual, but just give you an amount of money there that you
Sure.
can.
That would effectuate that
That
step-to-step
effect- yeah.
placement. And then for general, we're looking at a current range penetration with the new salary ranges presented by Evergreen for GO1 to G10, that capped at 7.5, which is very close to the average that a current range penetration would include anyway. And then the fully loaded cost of the general admin pay plan of G100 to G108 capped at 5.5.
Right.
Did I cover everything?
I think so. So, we'll look, and then the financial,
Yes.
Uh,
Yes, we'll prepare
models.
full financial pro forma showing the fully loaded cost for, that shows the impact for FY '24 and the forecast impact for the next 5 years, which is what we have in the budget on our summary of personnel costs.
and any recommendations from staff on how that we
Mm-hmm.
would fund it, especially for the rest of this fiscal year.
Yeah, about 12% of our personnel costs are supported by tourism funds, so we'll assume the same distribution and show that what that would look like. And then the impact of the general fund revenue
Yep.
as well.
All right. Is there anything else that we need to cover today?
The only thing I was going to mention, I think you touched on it earlier, Chair, in listening to the chiefs talk up here about recruitment and retention. So it sounds like going forward, we really need to see what we need to do to have a much more effective and robust recruitment and retention plan in place. I mean, I know the wages are going to help. You know, you make those adjustments, that's going to help some, but just getting them into interview, in some cases, it seems like you've had some real opportunities there, just getting the people.
Would it be all right to ask for the next meeting, maybe, have you come with just, what would be your top 3 other levers that you could use for retention? That might be helpful that you've seen in other areas or what have you. I think we got to put all that to the mix.
And I think when we work on the FY '25 budget, including a percentage of personnel costs in each department, that gives us the flexibility to make those adjustments when we're hiring somebody without fear of being over budget in our salaries and wages. Right now, we budget per the staffing that we have currently, and I think if we increase that slightly, just gives us that flexibility when we have a potential candidate with experience that would be able to offer them a competitive wage and not just bringing them at the minimum. I think that would be helpful. Anything else you all need from us?
I don't think so.
No, I think that's it for now. I may have some more comments on the general, to address specifically Public Works and Rec next time, but
Yes.
I think we've worked through the model enough, but I want to look at that a little bit more.
And then I'll ask Evergreen to pull that, and I think we'll be able to see the detail and any specific impacts that we're not anticipating with that philosophy that we'll be able to address once we can see it loaded on.
All right. Seeing no further business.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Off record at 2:04.
Thank you, guys and
Thank you.
gals.